What's up guys, and welcome back to another speculation video, and today we are going to be covering Pokémon Stars, the rumoured, the speculated game, sequel, update, remake, port, whatever you might want to call it, of Pokémon Sun and Moon to the Nintendo Switch. So last episode, or last part, whatever you might want to refer it to it as, we looked at the mascot for this game. So, what might the mascot be? Would it be Necrozma, Marshadow, or were there any other possibilities? Not really, so we decided Necrozma was basically going to be the mascot, if it was indeed like a third game of the series, game of the generation. But of course, now we have to talk about what the game will actually be, because there are actually quite a few different things it could be. The project name it was referred to as is Pokémon Stars, but that's unlikely to be their final name, because generally we don't get given, they don't say, yeah, the project name is going to be Pokemon Sun and Moon, and then, if that gets leaked, everyone knows exactly what it is. So generally, you give projects, for the majority of the company, for example, a very brief and, hushed name, and then the actual name, the actual, whatever is known to any people that need to know. So Pokemon Stars, as it's referred to, could be one of many different things, so that's what we're going to look at today. As always, let me know your opinion down below in the comment section. So there are actually, as I mentioned, quite different things. So we'll start with the simple one, it's not very most likely one, but the very simple one is that it could be, the project, Pokemon Stars, could be basically just a port of Pokemon Sun and Moon onto the Nintendo Switch. So currently obviously 3DS, but the Nintendo Switch has just come out. It does, the games basically have some HD capability to them, just needs to be up the ante basically, and the Switch would be brilliant to do that on. It's had a great launch, it's basically Nintendo's revival in terms of console, and it's not just a home console, it's a portable one, very similar to the 3DS. I know some people will not agree with this and say, no, it's the Switch is, the home console, the 3DS is still going to be the portable console, they're still going to focus on doing that, and I'm not saying they won't do that, so it's a bit tricky thing. I think the rest of Generation 7 will maintain on the 3DS, with the exception of possibly this game, this remake, whatever you might want to call it. They're not going to say, we got Pokemon Stars for the Switch, see you 3DS, not touching you again. I think that, if this will be like an extra, basically. So the first idea is, yes, it's basically a port. They make it HD, they put it on the Switch, and really, that would be enough. Even if you released the Pokemon Sun Switch, Pokemon Moon Switch version, that would probably be enough to actually sell it, decently well. I think the upgrade to HD would be enough for the community, or a good deal of community with Nintendo Switches, to say, you know what, I want to see what it's like on Nintendo Switch, I'm going to get it and play for it again. It was a great game, sort of thing like that. They could even, with this sort of thing, port it over, but also update it a little bit, so fix a few issues there were, and then there were too many issues that could be fixed, but they could do two things. Obviously, the big thing is that switching from the 3DS to the Switch, there is no secondary screen, there's no lower touch screen, so they have to rework the UI and a lot of the game's appearance, I suppose you could say. So battles, obviously you don't have the lower screen to be able to select your battle to switch Pokemon, so they might have to do something very similar to Pokemon Colosseum, Pokemon XD, where you had options on the screen, so it has to be reworked in some instances like that, but along with that they could fix one or two issues. I don't know really what issues there would be, but that they could fix. Some people complain the general is too small, can't really fix that on a port. Same thing for the Festival Plaza, can't really fix that because it would involve redesigning a whole chunk of the game basically. So while not, they could do one or two different tweaks here, maybe fix, design issues, something like that. They could do some updates like that, but the first idea is, yes, you're porting it from 3DS to the Switch, update to HD. People would buy it, that's what I'm saying. So the next idea is that it's not a straight up port, but it is a port with an update. So this is a bit weird, but basically, it's basically a port, is what I'm putting forward here, but it's a port that you take Pokemon Sun, you take Pokemon Moon, you combine them into one, you still combine the stories and the environments into one, and then you put it up as a third game almost, or a Switch game. So this could be Pokemon Stars, Pokemon Daylight, I don't know, whatever you call it. So basically, the storyline could involve both Solgaleo and Lunala. You could have one Cosmog, And then, depending on, it would evolve into, depending on Solgaleo or Lunala, depending on the time of day, you go to the altar and you actually do something. Maybe there's a couple of decisions you make along the way that decide whether it goes to Solgaleo or Lunala. Maybe there are two Cosmogs, maybe Lily's got one, and maybe you end up finding the other. So they could, make that work with a few different subtle changes to the storyline and have both Solgaleo and Lunala featured. They could even bring the Necrozma in as a third entity to maybe as part of the post game. So obviously we see Necrozma in the post game of Sun and Moon, thanks to the Ultra Beast. So we obviously then go and catch it, but you could instead look at just saying, I saw this. You could then build it into another little storyline on the end. That's leaning more towards a third game in the series, but obviously the fact that the main story is still focused on Solgaleo, Lunala, and basically the same story with Aether Foundation, Team Skull, it's more like a combined rather than a third game. The third game is indeed the next option, and that's the fact that it plays out very similarly to Sun and Moon, so very similar to a combined game, except we completely forget about Solgaleo and Lunala. So Aether Foundation might still be trying to do their spooky little shit with the Ultra Beasts, and still same thing there. Team Skull might basically be doing the same thing I can't remember the name of the town now, but you get Po Town, that's the one. So it might be same sort of storyline in that instance, but the difference is few subtle differences on the storyline. You have Necrozma, so rather than Lily having a Cosmog, maybe she doesn't have a Cosmog, maybe she does still, but it's not really playing into the main storyline. So maybe you then find Necrozma halfway along, maybe Cosmog actually ends up evolving into Necrozma if it's the third game in the series. They can always mess around with stuff a bit, who knows. And then, so there's a few different subtle differences in the storyline, but basically the same storyline as Sun and Moon, except you swap Solgaleo and Lunala out for a Necrozma-based storyline, and you, instead of going to the Ultra, or maybe you go to Ultra Space anyway, but you get to explore a bit more with Necrozma, a bit of an extended story there, sort of thing. So very similar to Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, where, you basically had, in Platinum you had Giratina, so you still had Dialga and Palkia in the story, but Giratina was the main focus. There was a bit of extra distortion world stuff going on there, so you could tack some of that on. And there'd be a few different ways you could do it there, and have a third game in the series, as mentioned. Of course, whether they would actually do that is another question, because that's basically completing the Generation 7 do and basically saying, if you want to play this game, you have to get the Nintendo Switch. But you could argue that it would be similar enough to Sun and Moon, but similar enough to say it's not like they're taking something away from people that can't afford a Switch, but at the same time it's still rewarding those that do have a Switch with an extra little bit of a storyline. The other option is, of course, a full sequel, sort of third series as well as being a sequel. So rather than just taking the Sun and Moon storyline and plopping the Necrozma in it, you say this takes place 3 years after Sun and Moon. So, for example, Aether Foundation, they might not be around anymore. You could, obviously this is something we'll look at in future videos, but they might not be around, or they might have remnants very similar to Plasma in Black 2 and White 2, and then you could focus it on stuff like that. As well as Team Skull, again, maybe remnants coming back, maybe not, maybe Team Skull is a force for good now because of Guzma, you turned him basically, who knows. And you could, basically 3 years in the future, maybe the Ultra Beasts make a return, because obviously the Ultra Beasts, it seems like, are not necessarily legendaries in the sense we have normal legendaries, because as we saw in the Ultra Space, there are loads of Nihilego there, so they are legendaries because they're very unique, but they're not legendaries in the Ultra world because there are loads of them, so there could be hundreds of Guzzlords, so you could have an invasion sort of thing, with all these Ultra Beasts invading. Maybe we're like, oh my god, how are we gonna defeat them? Well, we need something of equal power than the Ultra Beasts. The Necrozma. Maybe there's a couple of old stories about this Pokemon that came from the world, and stuff like that. And then the Necrozma builds in as a proper third game, like Black 2 and White 2, that focuses on the Necrozma again. Solgaleo and Lunala could still have starring roles, much like Zekrom and Reshiram do in Black 2 White 2. It's just a full sequel rather than a remake or an update, I suppose you could say. So those are the main options, I would say. So port, combined port, remake is the best way to do it, so just replace not Necrozma in there, or proper sequel. Those are the 4 options there. Obviously, overall, all 4 of them, you take Sun and Moon and you adapt it, basically. So you either change the storyline, you just change, you either change in terms of the port, you change the graphics, you change the storyline slightly with the combined port, or pretty well with the remake, with just putting the Crozma in instead, or you change it drastically so the environment of Lola could change to be a whole different game with the with the sequel rather, because you, as we saw with Black 2 and White 2, yes, there was a different area. You know, we had access to different areas of Nova, other areas had changed, so we would expect similar things from Alola. So maybe one of the volcanoes had erupted, so there was a lot more lava on Alola rather than before, and maybe, you know, the snowy mountaintops weren't snowy anymore because it erupted, sort of thing. So you could build it on like that, so it'd be a lot more work for them to do than a simple port, combined port, remake, or whatever. What do I think it's going to be? I don't know. At the moment we have no information at all. Could they do a port, just a simple port? Yes, very easily, as mentioned. You could put a port out today, you know, a HD version of Sun and Moon on the Switch, just slightly edited to work on the Switch, and people would buy it. People would buy it a decent amount, and the fact is, there's work to do that. So you're taking an existing game, and all you have to do is upgrade the graphical engine. Yes, I know it's not that simple, but, you know, tweak it slightly. It's not like you have to sit down for 12 months and say, right, okay guys, we have to plan out a new generation, a new region, a new storyline. You know, you don't have to do any of that. It's all in place. You just have to upgrade the technical side of it, which isn't as much work as all this planning. So they could do it, and it might not sell as much as Sun and Moon, sure, but it would still be enough to cover the costs of them doing it in the first place. The combined port and the remake, including the Crozma, would be a bit more work, and obviously to do this they would have to really push the release. Combined port or the Crozma being in there, of course, would also raise sales as well, because it would be a different game pretty much. But whatever the question is that enough? That, you know, are there enough people playing the Switch that would buy the game as a full game? Because obviously 3DS has been, for the last few years, their main platform for selling the main series games on. The Switch has only just come out, you know, a few months ago. I haven't got one myself. If this game comes out, I might end up getting one, but I know a lot of people won't be able to, because you know, the console has just come out. Some people wait, you know, a year or two for it to go down in price slightly, for you to get the better deals up there. So they'll have to weigh up the effort and the cost of building an extra game, or, you know, taking the existing games and changing a lot of the storyline. Weigh that up with the actual amount that was set, you know, amount of people that will buy it. So that'll be hindered, you know, that'll be looking at the sales of the Switch worldwide, and maybe if they've got access to data of how many people are actually playing them, you know, still, as well as just some general, you know, consumer marketing and such. And then you can extend that into the full sequel, where that's even more work, as mentioned, since you have to, you know, edit the region, create a whole new storyline, loads of stuff like that. It would be a lot more work than the previous ones. So I don't think it's going to be a full sequel. I just don't think that, you know, there's too much work for them to do. If there is a full sequel, I do not expect it to come out anytime soon. I think it will be launched in parallel with a 3DS version of the same game, possibly, because then again, you built it for the 3DS, so if people can't buy a Switch, they will get it on 3DS, but if they really want the full HD experience, they'll get it on the Switch, which will be priced slightly higher than the 3DS version. So if they're going for a full sequel like that, I expect them to, you know, have it be in the future as, you know, a parallel release. But apart from that, the other three I could see being released as an individual Switch-only title. For the moment, at least, they could put out a 3DS version in a year after that release. Who knows? And then go on from there. So that's just my thoughts on the issue. I don't know, on the situation. Of course, also talking and spitballing a bit into the TheOneIntegral remake speculation. If they were going to do remakes of TheOneIntegral after a Stars release, what would they do? Because then that means you've got Sun and Moon on the 3DS, Stars on the Switch. What are you going to do then? Well, I think you would just do a parallel release. You've tested the waters with the Switch. If the sales were good, then you do a parallel release, or release maybe the Switch a few months earlier than the 3DS version, and work it like that. That way you dip into both markets, you make it clear that yes, we're moving to the Switch in the future, but we're supporting the 3DS for the time being, just, you know, so we're not leaving out the people that don't have a Switch yet. That's my thoughts on that. As always, guys, let me know down below in the comment section. I think this is actually a really sort of controversial, I suppose, issue, or, you know, a problem or question, because, you know, when did they move to the Switch? A lot of people say, there's a pattern. They go, you know, DS, DSi, you know, 3DS, 3DS XL, you know, sort of thing per generation. And they're saying, we won't see a Switch for another year, you know, for another generation. So it's a really interesting question, for me at least, in terms of what they actually decide to do, because we don't know what they're going to do. They don't follow a script. They don't follow a pattern. This isn't Riot Games. So who knows what they do in the end. As always, let me know down below what your opinion is on the whole situation and stuff like that, let me know down below in the comment section. But for now, this is going to be it for me for today, so I shall see you next time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, my friends.